Dave Ripmont, Troutdale City Council.
Councilor Kranz.
Councilor Kranz, City of Troutdale.
We'll stay with the Troutdale and
Glenn White, Troutdale City Council.
Councilor Minor, Wood Village.
Scott Harden, Mayor in Wood Village.
Jairo Rios Campos, Wood Village City Council.
Lene Amen, Wood Village City Council.
Wendy Lawton, Fairview City Council.
Darren Reardon, Fairview City Council.
Steve Owen, Fairview City Council.
Keith Kuderna, Fairview City Council.
Brian Cooper, Mayor, Fairview.
And I'm Philip Morley, City Manager for Fairview.
Greg Dirks, Manager for Wood Village.
Ray Young, City Manager for Troutdale.
In the audience, if you want to introduce yourselves. Watching.
Eric Miller, Vice Director for the City.
Gotcha.
Thank you all. And then next we'll go ahead and turn it over then to Fairview City Manager Philip Morley to go over the purpose of tonight's meeting.
Great. Greetings, everybody, and thank you all for gathering together. And it's been a while since the three councils have got. And tonight, we brought together by a letter from Mayor Randy Lauer from Troutdale, and Mayor Lauer will speak in just a moment, but wanted to give you sort of a quick walkthrough of tonight's agenda and the public as well. So after our introduction and purpose of the meeting, we'll be talking about the context and challenges and opportunities for collaboration between the three cities. And we'll talk about some of the services we already share and or contract for, some of the public safety intergovernmental agreements and what kind of burden they place on our respective general funds. And we all are sort of in the same kettle of fish together. And then we'll also be talking about Gresham's revenue options analysis, which I think sets good context for tonight's discussion. That'll also be an opportunity for you as counselors to really talk about what do you see as some of the challenges and opportunities for collaboration between the three cities. What are the issues that we face together? And then moving from that is really talking about the opportunities for some initial collaboration and focus. All three of our cities are fairly constrained in staffing and budget. And so what can we realistically bite off and chew successfully together? And really the question is, what's the appetite and priorities that you as counselors may set for us as administrators? So we look forward to engaging in discussion and collaboration with you as you have those deliberations. We'll talk about some of the background of what Troutdale has done recently and looking at setting up an ad hoc committee to look at fire and law enforcement opportunities to pull information together as those intergovernmental agreements come up for renewal. And then really opening it up for counselor discussion of how can the three cities partner together on this and on other issues. And again, what I think you will hear from us as administrators and managers is let's really focus our efforts on what we realistically can accomplish together. And with that, we'll move to discussing next steps coming out of this meeting and ultimately adjourn. So with that, Mayor Lauer, would you like to talk about what your impetus was for the letter and calling for this meeting?
I would. Thank you, City Manager Morley. I appreciate it. So first off, I apologize for not being there in person. My 9 to 5 duties have taken me to Bend in some schooling to keep my state certifications for the City of Fairview. But thank you very much for everybody attending this meeting, either virtually or in person. And thank you to the City of Wood Village for hosting. Good evening, staff and councils. Thank you for agreeing to participate in the Three Cities meeting and have a discussion on an increasingly relevant topic, the idea of shared services amongst the three cities. With the economy looking to pick itself back up after the effects of the pandemic and with the inflation rate soaring to an all-time high, 8.2% as of September 2022, Changes must be planned for, and outside the box thinking might be what we need to get ahead of something larger that could be looming down the road. What does this mean? It means that the cost of providing service levels commensurate to the vision of goals of each of our cities is also rising. The cost of maintaining our green spaces, our water sewer infrastructures, our roads, our mapping, our SCADA systems, our contracted services, it's all going up as our economy attempts to steady itself. Regarding my professional role at the City of Fairview, we're currently short 3 key positions: an engineering manager, a senior accountant, and an office assistant 3 in our billing department. Now, some of you might be thinking, big deal, it's only 3 positions, and you might not be wrong in that thinking. But what some of you don't know is that these 3 positions make up a surprisingly large number of employees in each of their respective departments. Many employees are helping where they can, but the workload does not decrease just because we're short-staffed. The meters still need to be read, and the billing still needs to be done accurately and on time. In my government role, I know Troutdale is looking at a couple of vacancies, one of which is our Public Works Director. Having been employed with the City of Wood Village for almost a decade, I'm intimately aware of the specific needs of their city, but do not wish to speak for them as I'm no longer employed. The point of this is just to say that each of our cities in East County are facing the same economic and employment outlook as one another, and all cities have staffing shortages at some level and difficulties with regards to finding qualified applicants. When we ask ourselves on a government level what our main purpose is, our answers should echo each other: to offer the greatest level of service to the communities we were elected to represent. Similarly, when we ask ourselves on a city service level what our main purpose is, again, our answers should echo: to offer the greatest level of service to the communities we were hired to serve. We currently find ourselves in a unique position to work together in finding new and innovative ways to serve our communities. If all we get is so much as a hint of a way to offer more cost-effective practices yielding similar or more efficacious service levels, well, then we owe it to our communities to put in the work, study this further, and serve everyone to the best of our abilities. What I'm proposing is we as a 3 cities collective ask each other the following questions. Can we do better? Can we save our ratepayers money? And can we spend tax dollars more reasonably? If at any point in time we stop asking these questions, then I feel we are doing a disservice to the communities we serve. So thank you very much for taking part of this conversation. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mayor Lauer, and I'm going to share the screen here momentarily. It's also in your packet, but talk about the services we already do share. So in your packet, I believe we're on page 3 after the agenda, is a summary of all the services that are shared currently. Just make sure on Zoom, can you see that screen with the packet page there?
Yes.
Perfect. So I'm not going to go through all of these individually. It's in your packet, but certainly there's a rich and long history of our shared services, some of them going back 50 years, and including, sewer service from the city of Gresham. There's been, fire service for near over 30 years. And then even recently, things like building permits and inspections with Gresham, solid waste and recycling management. And they're, large contracts, or there's incremental ones, such as, the flower baskets and buying a piece of a person because it's hard to buy 10% of a person. But if you can get that increment of excess capacity, everyone's win-win. So just want to quickly say, are there any questions about this? And just, again, pointing out there is already a rich history of providing shared services where you can get those economies of scale and where it makes financial and applicable sense to share in those.
Kind of I kick in. Randy was supposed to give me a handoff, but he didn't. Before we kind of get going, I wanted to, kind of explain from Fairview's perspective. We have had a long history of trying to, it's always been one of our goals is to run a more efficient government. We've been playing with shared services in a tepid manner for years now. Place is a prime example of that. Where we couldn't do a service to our citizens on our own. So we went to our neighbors, and luckily our neighbors stepped up, and now we have a very robust recreation system for our kids. And that is a prime example of how we work together to provide a better service level to our communities. And Fairview has always been very supportive of such endeavors that makes us a better community. We look at all of these services and, you know, they are a lot, and we were talking about a lot of money. You know, I know everybody here has a specific issue that they want or that they feel there's a need. But I really would like to look at this thing more robustly, more across all things, because where we hope that maybe the three of us can work together and we can maybe come up with a better law enforcement solution. Maybe we can. I mean, maybe that simply is not, but maybe we can look at some other services and find some savings in those services. And then we can put more of those resources into public safety or to fire or whatever we might do. So while we look at these, I think is a good example of a lot of the stuff that we do. You know, there are a lot of things we don't do. Every city has all the same services, all the same departments, all the same stuff. And I knew back when we signed on with their law enforcement, I mean, there's an article in the Outlook stating this is unsustainable. I knew it was. I said it was going to be about 5 or 6 years that we were going to have to come to terms with the shifting to the Multnomah County Sheriff. And here we are, roughly about 5, 6 years. And we are, you know, I think we're still about two years away. So I'm happy that we are starting these talks now because I think, you know, nobody wants to have to go back to their citizens and ask for more money. It's a tough gig. You know, nobody likes you doing it. And so if long as we as counselors and as staff, you know, try to do the best we can to say, you know, we went through our books. We did all we could in order to squeeze all the savings we could and all the efficiencies we could. And then at the end of the day, we do need to raise taxes to provide better policing or fire or whatever it may be, then that's probably what it will be. But, you know, I'm willing to put the work in to robustly go over a lot of these issues and to try to find, I mean, my background is in business, been business the whole time. Every day I look for efficiencies and how to provide better services to my customers, and cities are no different. So sorry to interrupt, but so continue.
Great. Thank you. So, you know, what Mayor Cooper just talked about is a squeeze play that we are facing, particularly in the public safety arena when it comes to the general fund. And so if you look at the next item in your packets.
We also have some questions from the online.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Why don't you handle that, Greg?
Penny.
Sorry, I have to bring them back up. I hid. There we go.
There you go.
Councilor Glantz, you had your hand up?
Yeah, actually, Mayor Lauer also did. Did you have something? He was ahead of me.
I was gonna just mention that Councilor Nick Moon has jumped on just for the record. That was all. Thank you, Sandy.
And then I had just a kind of question, I guess. Most of what I see on what we share currently, and from what I understand, we kind of transfer year to year who runs it. Do we have any kind of IGA that, you know, where there isn't enough funding to be able to do everything we need to do? And I'm mentioning that because as we start to talk about this, I want to make sure we also bring in how priorities are set. Because if we sit there and we're all, you know, we need a new fire station, well, does that go in Wood Village because it's in the middle? Does it go in Fairview because it's a higher, you know, population percent, or does it go in Troutdale because it only has one over a certain geographic area? So when we're going through this, I want to make sure we have a decision criteria so that we don't get into a situation that, you know, we're unhappy in one area and that impacts other areas, because I do appreciate what we already have. That was it. That was my comment.
Okay, so we'll move on now and take a look at how our public safety intergovernmental agreements are impacting each of our cities. And generally, public safety comes out of our respective general funds. And recall that propositions 5 and 50 really have constrained property tax revenue to our respective general funds, both in freeze framing from several decades ago, the levy rate per thousand assessed valuation. That was constraint number 1. Constraint number 2 is then artificially constraining the assessed valuation for that taxation purposes. And so what that means is over time, the growth in revenue to our general funds in particular has been outstripped significantly by the cost of inflation to continue to provide existing services. And what that means is so when you look at Fairview, for example, our 3 intergovernmental agreements for law enforcement, fire and EMS and emergency communications consumes 78% of our general fund. That leaves very little room for anything else. In Troutdale, they account for 50% of the general fund, and in Wood Village, 46%. So roughly half or more of our general funds are consumed by just 3 intergovernmental agreements for public safety. Looking at law enforcement in particular, we have intergovernmental agreements for Fairview that expire in 2027, for Troutdale in 2025, and Wood Village has a legacy agreement that is perpetual. In the case, but we're looking at, for example, in Fairview, law enforcement alone accounts for 51% of all general fund current revenue, which is striking. In Troutdale, it's 26%. In Wood Village, it's 20%. So a big, huge bite. And what that means is if you're looking for opportunities for economies, those are the places that you start to look because those are the biggest bites. And in the case of law enforcement, for example, currently the sheriff's office is in negotiations and has been finalized in negotiations. My understanding in the first year is there's a 10% wage increase for deputies plus an additional 5%. So in the first year of the contract, we'll be seeing a 15% increase in labor costs for Multnomah Sheriff's Office deputies. So ultimately, those kinds of costs are going to trickle down to the contract cities, which we all 3 are. In the case of fire, in Fairview, we spend almost $1.3 million. In Gresham spends $2.6 million, and a little bit over $500,000 for Wood Village for fire and EMS services. Those IGAs all expired at the same time in 2025. So there's an opportunity for collaboration and negotiating with Gresham or potentially with Fire District 10 or
Can
looking
I
at
ask a
other.
question?
Yeah.
For clarification, Philip, please. When you said the cost of the contract at 10 and an additional 5% with Multnomah County, when would that become, when would that be implemented?
There are some caps in our agreements, and so it depends on the specifics. Each of us have a different public safety agreement, so that's going to vary from city to city.
I think that contract is retro.
Okay.
We don't have to experience that high an increase because we are capped at 4.5%.
Okay.
Except for Wood Village, I don't know how they figure it.
Sure.
Yeah. But for example, when our IGAs expire, there's going to be a catch-up pressure.
Yeah.
And so that's going to
I
bite
see
us.
the expiration date. Is that when the catch-up, this increase occurs? Do you have a cost of living on it now?
I think I want to take another look at the IGA with that question in mind.
Fair.
Yeah.
Thank you.
IGA sets our annual increase at 3%. I'm looking at there at 3%, 4.5%. By what their actual increases are. So their increases are 5, 6, 7, 10, 15%, whatever it is, we are still capped at 4.5, which is, as Phil indicated, we're going to be expected probably in 2025 for us in 2020. A catch up. And I assume they're going to come knocking on Wood Villages. I don't know.
Yeah, we won't be home.
Lights will be off.
Yeah.
And it's really not much different than what we've been hearing for a while from Gresham, in that they've been doing larger cost increases and experiencing more cost pressures than what our cost allocation allows in the contract with the cap, and it's based on assessed values. Because we don't control what they do in-house. We don't control their contract negotiations. We don't have a seat at the table. We don't control what capital they choose to do or not do, and what those future potential liabilities may or may not be. So at some point, and that's a concern when these IJs expire, what do those negotiations look like, and what are the other options on the table to at least bring to the table to have a meaningful discussion?
You bet. Well, thank you. Those are all the crux of it that we're all facing.
And from where this hits as an example is, so public safety is a core that municipalities provide. There are other services that are essential to the quality of life for our communities, but that under the law are discretionary, recreation being one of them. And yet recreation oftentimes is paid out of the general fund. So when you look at the expiration of these IGAs for public safety and how constrained our general funds already are, where's the money going to come from when the cost increases hit us? And so do we then start losing other critical services? And that's what's at stake here. And then finally, emergency communications is much smaller. That's with City of Portland. Those are IGAs are perpetual, but you can see that there's still some sizable dollars that we're dealing with. So I'll stop there and take any questions that you might have.
Yeah,
Wendy.
Philip, I had one to just follow up with what you just talked about, and it's kind of a question a little bit about how the conversation tonight is being framed. It says opportunity for initial collaboration and focus is on fire and law. Is that because that's where we think we would likely get the biggest financial benefit from collaboration?
Yeah, I would say, and I'd invite the other managers to speak, but that's both the biggest opportunity and also the biggest liability that we're facing looking ahead, because we see Gresham is struggling with funding their fire. The study that you've read and that Ray will talk you through on some, really identified that from a Gresham perspective, we're paying less than their citizens are.
Right.
And we also know that at the same time, they're doing a service study that is looking at how they want to increase staffing and increase the level of service over what it is today. And so all that adds up to increased cost. And as Greg said, unless we're working together and are in a position for strong negotiation with Gresham or looking at alternatives, they're just handing us a check.
Bill.
Yeah. I meant the check as in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Bill's here. And I think we just barely glossed over 5 and 50. And I think it's important to point out that where they have left us now is that the amount of property tax collected by Multnomah County that gets returned to each of our cities does not completely cover just these 3 public safety services that we're talking about tonight, police, fire, and BOEC. So we have to come up with money from someplace else in order to pay for those 3 services. And in the city the size of Wood Village, there's only 11 revenue sources. And so, we would have to look at how to raise revenue in other places, and taxes, unfortunately, likely not one of them in Wood Village, because our charter says that any tax has to come from a vote of the people.
Yeah. And Scott, I would like to sort of follow up, because that was 5 and 50 were really on my mind as well. And I hope that whatever comes of this discussion tonight, that we will agree to cooperate, whether we cooperate on police and fire services, but that we would agree to cooperate to educate residents about the impacts of 5 and 50 on our communities, which is quite significant. And also to, work together to lobby our state representative and our state senator on this as well. This can has been kicked down the road long enough. And the real obvious solution is the hard solution, and it's a long-term solution. We won't change that for at least like 3 to 5 years. But I do hope that that's something that we commit to, because I think we have to really start talking seriously to residents about not just taxes, but value. The value of your property, the value of our quality of life. Because I really believe that we're gutting the value of people's property, and we are gutting the value of our quality of life by not addressing the tax issues that are facing us. And as a former employee of the city of Gresham, it's a two-edged sword. You cut and you cut and you cut and you cut and you economize. And people expect you to do that forever. And look where their public safety is. It's a two-edged sword. And I think that we have to talk with people really honestly about taxes and value and what it means, really.
And if I could speak for 2 minutes about property taxes as well, and looking at the League of Oregon Cities, which is supposed to be the city's advocating arm at the legislature, we are not seeing an appetite from the League of Oregon Cities to take wholesale changes to property taxes, but what we have seen are smaller bites at it. For example, I forget the exact bill that it was, but for Multnomah County, it reset the smaller cities change property ratio for cities outside of Portland, because as it currently stands, the change property ratio, which the 2-second summary of that is basically new construction or significant reconstruction. When it comes on the tax rolls, it's reassessed to make it similar to existing properties. So for example, the bulk of our cities, a new project, does they cost $4 million to build? It's actually going to be assessed at $2 million. So it's already getting a 50% property tax break on what it should be paying. When the bill went through a few years ago, it reset that to essentially what the current market was for each jurisdiction: Gresham, Wood Village, Fairview, and Troutdale. But it's always a declining ratio, because as property values continue to increase, new construction is always a declining ratio. Nothing in the Constitution, when that was put in place with measures 5 and 50, says it has to be a declining ratio. It can actually be the set value that it was back in 1995. So essentially, you'd only be changing new construction. They would be assessed at what that 1995 ratio was, which was dramatically higher since it was a new ratio, and it'd be a set ratio, no longer declining. So there's a push to put that into this upcoming legislative session. And so again, areas of synergy, cooperation, just advocacy for these smaller bites that over time make up a significant difference, especially in terms of new construction that doesn't impact our current residents today.
Thank you. I didn't know about that.
Did LLC, didn't they do a reset on sale at some point a couple of years ago? Wasn't that one of their priorities?
It might have been a priority, but it was never.
Yeah,
Portland was talking about it.
It was
for
a
while.
priority, but reset at sale actually takes a constitutional amendment as well.
Yeah. I mean, one of my big frustrations in the city is the fact that there's one property that I denote down on Marine Drive. It was recently purchased for $2 million and it's currently assessed at $287,000. So, you can go start going through a lot of your properties and looking at stuff like that. And you're just like, there's a reason why we don't have any.
And I'm sure all of our cities took advantage when we were given the opportunity, but just for Wood Village, it took us from that Portland 50% to 60%. So
I know that's a big complaint from Gresham is, the sins of the 90s. Whatever was going on in the 90s is what sets your permanent rate. And that's why Hillsborough has such a higher tax base than Gresham does. And Gresham has always been behind the 8 ball, but they're probably bigger. I think they're a slightly bigger city. So, yeah.
it's this type of indexing that we're talking about that the state left out. I could be wrong on these numbers, but I think there's 17 states where they have some artificial construct that determines your taxes besides the actual value of your home. And we're one of only 2 that didn't index it at all. we wrote the law for 1995.
somebody
Why
did.
not have it changed from 1990? 2000 at some point in time, but this change property ratio idea doesn't require a constitutional amendment, and it kind of does put that scale in there.
Well,
Even California resets every 10 years.
Yeah.
Well, unless the state wants to do something, which I don't foresee, then I think we're stuck doing what we're doing. So.
Well, I think we are, and not just in cities, but our schools and the entire gamut of human resources and is shortchanged because we're working off of 5 and 50. So I think in any of these conversations, that is the big umbrella that puts us all in any of our roles in this bind. And so I think it does have to be talked about when it can. And we have work to do right here because that's the cards we have right now.
We're first line. We're
Yeah.
first line defense. We're the ones everybody yells at.
That's right. But we can help educate about the taxation system
Right.
in this state. And I always believe the question is, what's a reasonable cost for the level of service we want to deliver? Figure out that reasonable cost. And sometimes it may cost more than we have to do it. And then that becomes an effort in public relations. So these challenges aren't new to any of us. We know that. But that's the umbrella, excuse me, but let's see what we can get done here.
And it's House Bill 2088 that would essentially set a change property ratio dating back from
2088?
2088.
Okay, thank you. And I do hope that this isn't going to be a binary conversation. I don't think it's like a state issue versus what we can do locally. I think we can advocate and educate about 5 and 50 and look at what we actually have direct command and control over. I don't think it's a one or the other.
I think that's exactly right. That should be always the conversation when we're trying to deal with the budget issues. It needs to be always as I say, the big umbrella is the problem with the taxation, and that has to be talked about. It can't be ignored at the state level.
Well, that's what I said. I mean, if ultimately what comes out of this thing is maybe we can't find, substantial amount of savings in whatever services that we provide as 3 cities, that will eventually have to go back to the public. At least we can do it with our head mostly high and say, we did our best.
Yeah. And that's where the League of Oregon Cities, I think, comes in. And if one of the cooperating things could be just the mayors all agree that there's going to be at least conversation at the League of Oregon Cities and be able to talk about that. So those are the things that I think can come out of this also.
Excellent.
Yeah. Thank you.
Did the best for last, didn't we?
Or the longest. Shortest. Ended for last. All of you have a copy of the revenue options analysis for the city of Gresham. A shorter executive summary for you that's in your packet also. The city of Gresham earlier this year hired Northwest, which is a fairly well-known common consulting company that does economic analyses for different jurisdictions. The city of Gresham asked them to look at 3 different city departments and how could they get more money to support those departments. They looked at the 911 service, they looked at their street lighting, and they looked at their fire department. And I'm going to focus primarily on the fire department information in that report tonight, because that's the only issue we share with the city of Gresham. We all deal with our 911 separately with our own contracts with the city of Portland, and Mid-County Lighting handles our street lighting. Doesn't it for all 3? I know it does for us. Oh, for City of Troutdale, I don't know how you guys do yours, but
We pay for it.
as they found in the report, it is such a small number overall for the city of Gresham. They just said, oh, just add $5 per utility bill or something and collect $3 million that way. I'm sure the citizens wouldn't think it was just an easy thing to do, but I'm going to focus primarily on their fire department. Now, the report from Econ started with a factual assumption, and they called it in their report a structural revenue deficit. That's another way of saying they're facing a financial train wreck in the next couple of years. That's really what the report says. They have to deal with a problem more acute than we do. If anybody's more interested in the Measure 5, Measure 50, because that's a cascading problem that started in the late 90s, they covered that in their report. So you might want to read there. And we all started halfway, behind the 8 ball because City of Portland's permanent tax rate is twice any of our 3 tax rates. That was crazy unfair back then. I don't know where they came up with it, but they did. So if you want to read that, look at that. But it's easy to see why there is a coming train wreck for the city of Gresham, and we can't avoid the fallout in that. As Philip told you, Wood Village pays about 46%, Troutdale about 50%, and Fairview close to 80% of its general fund revenues each year for police, fire, and 911. The city of Gresham pays 90% of their general fund revenues for police, fire, and 911. And the only reason they're surviving this year is they took one-time ARPA money, $4 billion, and plugged it into those 2 departments, and they paid for 10 FTE in police and fire with their ARPA money that will not be given to them in 23-24. I don't know what they're going to do then. They took one-time money and they're trying to fill a long-term gap. But that's clearly shows you that Gresham is experiencing a big problem. So the report means most to us on the fire department front, because it's hard I think, for us to be able to see a fire protection future for us, for the 3 cities, that doesn't involve Gresham. So their pain and their solutions are going to directly impact us. I say that we're going to have probably have a future that involves Gresham and our fire protection for a couple things. Number one, it would be very, very expensive for any one of us or all 3 of us together to start our own fire department. Who here owns any fire stations? Oh, I see no hands up. Who here owns any fire trucks? Nobody. We would probably be required to buy property and build at least 2 fire stations over the 3 cities at a cost of anywhere from $10 to $15 million capital up front. And then fire trucks are not cheap. You got boots and you got masks and oxygen stuff, all the equipment. You're looking at easily $5 million for all the equipment you would need to outfit a fire department. And so $15 to $20 million would simply be the startup costs for a fire department. Additionally, as Gresham tells us over and over again, we're paying like 80 cents on the dollar what it's really costing the Gresham citizens to provide fire service. So you got to figure the 4.3 million that we all together pay to City of Gresham is really closer to probably 5.5 to pay for that same service, 5.5 million. So if we try to create our own, we're going to have to get our citizens to approve a bond levy because nobody has that much money sitting around. And in East County, we all know bond levies don't do nearly as well as they do west of 181st, right? They just don't. Our citizens, don't approve those very often. In fact, when they're approved at Metro Multnomah County, and some of you have probably seen the numbers, a lot of the bond levies that we're paying on your property taxes failed in Troutdale, Wood Village, and Fairview, but they passed because of the Portland voters. So out in East County, it would be hard to be able to get that money in a bond levy to create our own fire department. Second of all, Fire District 10 isn't really an option because Fire District 10 has a half-time employee. Fire District 10 simply runs their tax-based money through other areas and pays the city of Gresham for their fire service. So they're not really an option for us. So since it's unlikely to see a scenario where we could come up with the money for our own fire department, Fire District 10 isn't a lifeline to us anymore. They used to be 20, 30 years ago, but things have changed. City of Gresham is the one that we're generally going to have to be looking at. So that is kind of why we have to consider what Gresham is doing. So this also as a side note, I will mention our options for fire are different than law enforcement. Maybe not better for law enforcement, but at least we have police facilities. We have a beautiful building in Troutdale that houses more police than we need. Fairview has a section of its city hall for fire police. So we have facilities for police. The equipment for police isn't quite as expensive as the fire trucks are. So at least there is an argument that seems more reasonable in terms of finances that we could pursue law enforcement different from Multnomah County. Not saying we don't love Multnomah County. They've been great to work with. But again, costs are going to hit us in 2025, 2026, and maybe someday this legacy contract with Wood Village, somebody might look at it. And the other option is for if we don't do our own, there's always the option, I'm not advocating for it, but there's always the option of asking Gresham about expanding their police services out to the 3 cities. Those are options. not advocating for any of them, but I'm just trying to say that law enforcement is a different scenario of options for us than fire. We are kind of, in some ways, predisposed to favoring some relationship with the city of Gresham. Now, in the report, the city of Gresham report discussed three different options. One option they discussed was a local option levy, which would give a limited amount of years infusion of money for the fire services. Essentially, the citizens of Gresham say, yeah, we want to be taxed more on our property tax bills for fire, and you can use that to keep the services going. But the thing is, how does that impact the three cities? Because we're not paying that increased cost. We have to assume that Gresham will look at us to get those increased costs. And that's not necessarily a long-term solution. The citizens have to keep approving those local option levies. The other two options are pretty much the same that Gresham is looking at. And some of you might have been involved a couple of years ago when Chief Snyder at Gresham Fire, he was pushing the Safer Council that met for about a year. And one of the things we talked a lot about was fire districts. Most of you are familiar with the Tualatin Valley Fire District. That is a fire district that covers at least 3 or 4 different cities on the west side in a whole large area. So they all share the burden of the cost of fire services. So the report that you have that they did for Gresham looks at 2 scenarios for a fire district for the city of Gresham. One is the citizens vote for a brand new one, saying, let's just create a fire district. And the other option they talked about was everybody get annexed into Fire District 10. And Fire District 10 all of a sudden becomes a new lively organization that starts getting financed and comes up with an agreement with City of Gresham to take over their fire stations. I don't know if you're aware, but Fire District 10 owns the Troutdale Fire Station up on Cherry Park, and they own the one out on 302nd out in southeast Multnomah County. And the training center. Yes, they do. So, and they lease them for like $1 to Gresham, I think, something like that to use. So that is the other option. So if Gresham pursues one of those options, of course, number one, you have to understand the district option means that becomes a separate government entity with its own tax base. If you read the report, a creation of a new district would garner about $2.60 per thousand, while if it is annexed into Fire District 10, it's at $2.82 per thousand increase in our citizens' property tax bill. So a fire district would come with an extra cost to everybody. If Gresham goes that direction, I would suggest we will have some really tough choices to make. Either go the expensive route of asking our citizens to our own fire departments out here, or ask them to also annex to Fire District 10 would be the 2 options for our citizens. It is not an easy nut to follow, but as we've talked about 5 and 50, this problem on income has been cascading over 25 years. And as they always say, the chickens are coming home to roost. It's going to be significant cuts in services, or we're going to have to look at other ways to fund these, and the citizens will get those tough questions. Philip.
Yeah, right. I just wanted to point out, so in the event that a district is formed,
with the levy that the district would be doing, what that would mean is that it would supplant the general fund dollars that currently the 3 cities are putting into fire. And so whatever we're currently paying, we would get that much headroom in our general fund budgets to cover other costs. Now that would buy us, time and perhaps decades, but eventually still there's going to be that compression issue, but it certainly would buy us a lot of time.
That slams you right up into the compression, doesn't it?
Right. So one of the issues, and Ray, I don't know if you were going to talk about that they identified in the Gresham.
Yes.
It basically means that the state law caps the total amount of property taxes that can be assessed on any property. And when the total amount of property and it doesn't stop you from assessing beyond the limit, which I think is $15 per thousand, but it simply then goes back and gives a percentage and evenly, or some ways unevenly divides. So if you have a bond levy that's supposed to get you $10 million with compression, maybe you only collect $9 million because they had to reduce everybody's piece of that pie. because it's compressed. Out in East County, it's not quite as bad, but in the city of Portland, compression is a real nasty thing in terms of cutting down the ability to receive income. Anyway, but the big,
There is a question from Councillor Glantz.
oh, Councillor Glantz.
Yeah, I have just a kind of high level question, which is this really a funding issue, or do we think that there could be more efficiency in how Gresham has been running the fire system?
Well, first of all, we have absolutely no say in how Gresham runs their fire department. Zero, zippo, nada. And that is one of the advantages to the fire district is our citizens would get an equal vote, a proportional vote in every decision made by that fire department. Currently, right now with the Gresham Fire Department, we have no say in their budget. We have no say in their union negotiations. We have no say in their choice of chief of police. We have nothing. So Councillor Glantz, we have no say in that at all. And when it comes to economics of scale, I have no personal expertise in knowing what that looks like. I think if you looked around at other fire departments, they're probably costing roughly the same per citizen as most other jurisdictions. So it's a great question to ask, and it's something, you can look at, but I don't know how you make that play out in real savings that are going to matter for us with inflation. But
in Gresham's defense, 5-6 years ago,
somebody mark that on the record that Mayor Cooper is defending Gresham.
I'm doing that only for Travis. So they did come out with that rapid response vehicles because it was really expensive to roll out an entire fire engine to get somebody back onto a toilet or something. So they did. I mean, they have been working on trying to find more efficient ways of doing their services over the years. But again, you're going to hit the ceiling eventually.
Yeah, well, with the depth
That's
of
fine. I'm
these,
just trying to, as we look at the big picture, is it that we just need to figure out the best way to get additional funding? Is that really the question? And I know that, yes, we all want a seat at the table for how those dollars are spent, since it's, our city's taxpayers that are kicking it out. So thanks.
So yeah, it's a great question. It's something that we at least need to ask the question and at least get an answer. And I know the city managers are all a big fan of getting you all the correct information. You may not like what we tell you, but we want to make sure you have all the information you need to make these very important decisions for our citizens. So the city of Gresham, we don't know what they're going to do at this point. They stopped working with us when the Safer Council was kind of suspended about 1.5 years ago. They had a transition in terms of city manager, they had a transition in fire chief. And so they are still trying to figure out, I think, what they want to do with it but we are going to be impacted by it. So it is going to be a big decision for us in that area. So we have had discussions with Fire District 10 and their board, and they're open to talking to us about any of these options that might include them. They appreciate that they're in the same boat that we are. So I guess the couple bottom lines to remember and what we see in this report is that when our fire contract comes up for renewal on July 1st of 2025, Gresham will be asking for a significant increase in what we're contributing. If things stay as they are, they absolutely will be asking for a big increase. Second of all, I'm not sure unless you believe our citizens will approve bond levies for lots of money to have maybe a local optional levy for fire to help supplement those costs, or to start our own fire departments with a big bond levy. We don't really have other places to look that seem to be financially feasible at this point. And if Gresham does pursue a fire district, either one, Fire District 10 or creating a brand new one, we are going to be in the same boat. Either we have to negotiate with that fire district if it's just Gresham, or we're going to have to join them with our citizens and have a vote to join the same fire district. The advantages, as we've talked about or alluded to, is at least if we're in a fire district with them, we have equal say at the table as to how that fire department is run, which we do not know now. I'm not saying they're not run competently, because Mayor Cooper's correct. They have done things to try to improve those economics of scale and lower their costs. But those are generally small things, are not anything significant, because personnel costs are a big deal. So anyway, no, I went over a lot, but for us, this, I think, is the biggest decision our citizens are going to have, is dealing with what Gresham decides to do to deal with their financial train wreck that's coming down the road in terms of their general fund and these services. And we're going to have to be able to deal with that and ask our citizens or give them several options. So.
I know that, I just wanted to note that the city of Gresham has also, I know that you guys, but I'm not sure that everyone is aware of this, that the city of Gresham has also been looking into a parks district as well. And again, like all of these ideas being like, let's take those expenses out of our general fund and move them someplace else so we have more money to do all of the other stuff, right? And so again, I think these are not necessarily bad ideas, but I also think it's a bit of a, at the end of the day, it's a bit of a shell game unless we're all willing to really think really broadly and creatively about how we're sharing our resources. Like we do stuff, for example, with the schools, you know, which own a lot of parks, right? And, you know, who's going to maintain those? I mean, they have a lot of green open spaces. I mean, I think that we're going to have to get existentially, we will need to decide this classic kind of competition versus cooperation, evolutionary biology concept. Like how much are we going to compete or are we going to cooperate? And I think we have been cooperating more and more as time goes on because we frankly are being forced to. And, you know, are we going to continue that? And how much and where? Because there's law enforcement, but again, there's also parks is also on the table. And I know that the city of Gresham set aside a significant amount of money to study that issue as well. So we're, you know, I hope that we can look at this all. It's complicated and look at it all holistically to see like, what do things actually cost? How much do we really have? How much, you know, movement can we really make alone or with some kind of state solution? Because there's a lot on the table and I did look at, you know, and I props to all three of you for putting together a really great packet with some really good data. I learned a lot just reading it and I'm glad that it's publicly available so other people, you know, the public can read this as well. But yeah, that we just kind of keep looking at this holistically and kind of decide which, you know, which way do we go? Because I think it's going to have to be some pretty radical collaboration or we're just going to be cutting around the edges. We're just going to be nibbling around it. And I wanted to also ask, was the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office or the Gresham Fire Department invited to this meeting?
They weren't not invited.
Probably because
They weren't directly invited.
Yeah, probably too much into the weeds.
Okay.
I think it's a good idea that we have some conversations now, like we're having right now. And I'm not sure of this strategically, but it may be worth thinking about that. I believe myself would be better off thinking about the solution that we would like for a fire protection before Gresham makes a decision. The decision we might make might be able to help Gresham then move forward with a decision that would mutually support some of their goals and certainly us. But I think that this fire issue needs to be addressed. And I think we need to be thinking hard about a fire district. I just don't see really any much of an option there. And I'd rather see us move first. I'd rather see us as three cities having an agreement on what would work for us.
Well, we have to have those negotiations without them because to the extent that you're trying to develop not only a system, but leverage for negotiation, you don't want to give away all your secrets. And then the Gresham folks have just got to get the hell out of their own way. Sometimes if you were to have that fire bond and the parks bond on the ballot at the same time, one or both would lose because people get bond fatigue. And the fire district would be so much better for parks than a parks district, because you wouldn't be robbing parks money from other cities in the area, and you'd be able to take a hell of a lot more money out of your general fund and devote it to parks if your citizens were paying for fire instead of your general fund.
To John's point earlier, and like being really honest about all of the effects, unless and until we change 5 and 15. Having a parks district or having a fire district is going to lead to more compression, which is going to hurt our schools.
Yeah,
Like it's going to hurt our libraries. Like it's all kind of coming from the same pot. We are taking money out of people's budgets, and it all affects our kids and our family and our property values and our quality of life.
And there was a question from Counselor Nick.
Hey, all.
Councilman.
Yes, thank you. I just want to reiterate the point too, that we need to be a lot more aggressive in this discussion about what I'm hearing so far is that I'm liking that we need to be unified and negotiating from a path of strength and like moving forward and not, let's wait and see what Gresham does. I think that would be the worst thing that we can do. I think being unified and exploring our options like we're doing is going to be the best path forward. I think doing a fire district plan and having a plan in place and in motion is going to be our best negotiating tool in this whole scenario. So that's really that's where I'd like to see us be going. So thank you.
No, Counselor, that's a great point. And in fact, we've done it before. There's only a few people in the room that are likely to remember. But in 2013, the 3 cities paid to commission a study with Portland State University on the relative merits of different fire delivery systems and the costs that might be associated with them. And, at that point in time, Gresham, proved to be sort of the cost leader. That's what led to negotiating another 10-year contract. But district was actually the second most viable idea of the many that came out of this report. And I have dug back through my emails and found this from 2013. So if anybody wants it, it could lend a little bit of context. But I think that, a good start would be commissioning a new study.
You could circulate that.
I'll email it to your respective city manager so then they can share it with whom.
Harden and Councilor White, was anybody else around back then? And
I was.
Oh, you were? Okay,
I'm
yeah.
the old man around here.
I know Councilor White was very involved in that process back then.
Yeah, I was selected by Troutdale to be on the negotiation team for Troutdale. And I'm not a fire expert, but I know that the response times means you're not going to get saved if you're having a stroke or a heart attack. And that's still current today. So we're spending all these millions of dollars and you're not saving lives. So we approach it from an angle of saving lives. And I met with actual firefighters, and one of them was Dave Flood, who's the current fire chief of Corbett. Now they have a much different situation, but Dave at the time had lived on Interlochen. And I think by Blue Lake, you guys are familiar with that. They have a really big problem with response times there. And there isn't very much water pressure on the hydrants there either. So, and because he cared, and he was a upper ranking Portland firefighter for a long time, he wanted to build a better mousetrap, and he came up with a proposal that actually helped all 3 cities because Gresham took it serious and they gave us a pretty good deal on that 10-year contract. Also, that's where the idea for the QRV came from. It was out of Dave Flood's work and others. And the goal also was not to build these super expensive fire stations with, a vintage fire truck in the window, for example. And,
commercial kitchen or.
Yeah, it was very streamlined.
Yeah.
And because of that, the prices were much cheaper than what Ray just came up with. And there was a whole PowerPoint presentation. I think the 3 cities should review that and look at it. And it was a great plan. And had we done it, we would be miles ahead right now. And who knows how many lives, most importantly, we would have saved lives. Because if you don't have someone there, does anybody know the national standard for response time for fire?
4 minutes for critical care incidences.
Okay.
What'd you say, Greg?
4 minutes.
And we get a quarterly report showing the actual times we're receiving now by city. And I'm not cutting Gresham at all, but just think about it from a common sense point too. If you needed to drive the distance from Troutdale to Wood Village, now do that same distance going towards Gresham. It's going to take you a lot longer. It's just a lot more congestion and traffic going that. We're in a unique situation where we can move east to west much faster than we can north to south. And I think with the money we're spending, we could start our own fire department. And I've looked at things before. I saw the rates that Fairview and Wood Village get on sewer. And I met with our city engineers to see if, could we help our neighbors out? And it proved to be impossible because you guys gravity feed the opposite direction from Troutdale. But I mean, my heart was in the right place to do something because you guys get a terrible deal from Gresham. And I think the more we contract out, the less we do for ourselves, the more of those raw deals where we have no control or no say, and we're paying a lot and not getting what is necessary for our communities. So I'd like us to take a serious look at that and see if there's a way that we could just take our existing money. That way we don't have to do a bond levy. We could start small and maybe in 5 years we could break away completely. And it would also help Gresham in the long run too, because if there was a big fire, we'd be able to send support, just like Dave Flood's volunteer fire department. A lot of times they're the first ones on scene. And they also have the tanker truck. I don't know if Gresham has a tanker truck. I think they still don't, but it's really good for brush fire and wildfire, something else that's becoming more and more relevant to the conversation. So I'm not trying to criticize our firemen at all. I really like Chief Snyder, and he'd be the first one to admit to you that the response times are not adequate.
I think the three city managers will all agree that we'll get you that stuff from 2013 so you can see all that information. At least it'll tell you what was done back then and give us a good start on what we may need to do in the future. And I think I'll just transition to the next item on the agenda. Out in Troutdale, a month or so ago, the council discussed and decided that we needed to start now. And so you see in your packet the resolution that Troutdale City Council passed, which begins simply a working group in January that will start gathering information. It's not making any decisions. It's simply asking the questions that some of us are asking tonight. What are our options? What information do we need to explore those options? How do we get the answers that we need, hopefully a year or two before these contracts expire, so we have good information to make a decision? So it is something that we are starting the process on in Troutdale to get that information together so that we start getting up to speed on all these questions. So it's something that I think it's something that all three cities, I think it's been suggested from the other two city managers, hey, how do we get involved in this wonderful working group, Ray? Well, maybe that's a possibility. So,
well, I mean, so, Philip did ask me prior to this, he goes, what do you hope to get out of this thing? I said, if I can get out of this meeting with just an agreement to look at this further, I said, I'm happy. Because I've been down this road a couple of times before over the past. And, sometimes people get their heels dug in on just a single issue in spite of the larger issue. And I think that I think the presentations tonight were fantastic. And I think it does give us a broad overview of our larger problems. But as Glenn pointed out, I mean, there's sewer issues, we're talking about group things that we pay for on any given year that we could all look at as, where are those potential savings? Where can we supply our citizens better services? He asked, well, what's going to happen if it blows up? I go, I don't think so. I think we are in a unique time now that, the outside pressures of the world are catching up to us. And this is a good time for us to start, buckling down and really getting to understand what our cities are, what our cities do, you know, how much it's costing our citizens to get this stuff done, and where we can use economies of scale to fix these things. I mean, we lost our IT person. And the first thing I asked was, well, doesn't Troutdale have an IT person? I mean, can we contract out with an IT person over there? I mean, save us money. She'd probably make more money having supplying two cities. You know, something simple as that does a saving. It gives a better service. I'd like us all to have this broader open mind of exploring all of our city services and how, because as I said early on, I don't know whether we can, do something on the fire level or on the policing services, but we could have savings elsewhere that would, buffer the hit that we're going to take in a couple of years. So we got a couple of years to play with this thing, and I really this is one of the issues that I got left is trying to fix what we started 5 years ago in making our policing unsustainable. So I'm happy with the conversation so far. It's been fantastic. And yes, we do need a large ad hoc committee.
And you're talking,
the better.
yeah.
And the ad hoc are the better. So we can get a lot of people.
And we're talking about a joint ad hoc. Is that correct or separate?
Well, we're trying to decide what we're talking about. So the floor is open. Throwing out ideas of how we cooperate on this issue.
Can I add one quick thing? In talking about, certainly an approach with Gresham, there's a lot of ways to slice and dice fire, but we do know in 2.5 years, Gresham will be giving us a number. What might be a good approach is, go back to your respective councils, your budget committees. We spend $4.5 million now for what we do. According to the back of envelope math, it's, 7.5 million for a district. What's the tipping point? What's it worth? Call it running it ourselves or through a district. What's it worth doing the current arrangement? And that gives Gresham a number saying, here's our magic number. Here's our do not exceed number. If you can't beat that, we're going to a district. It may force your hand to either come back to the table with a reasonable number, because while we do pay less than the residents, as has already been explained, we're renters of their system. And frankly, our increment of money allows their system to be more efficient and more effective. And we just so we don't consume essentially the $4.8 million that we give them. And if we took that away, they would get less service themselves. So that is the bargaining chip that we have, and giving them that number sooner than later may force some options, because while there is 2.5 years or are 2.5 years, it takes about a year for education and outreach, and then plus a year to run a successful bond campaign. So the time is upon us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and we may not even need to run a bond campaign. Part of the flood report, part of the Portland State report is that, you look not only at who delivers the service, but how the service is delivered. Maybe it could be a paid command staff and all volunteer firefighters.
Right.
And so, we haven't even started that conversation yet. And then, because Mayor Cooper, relatively conservative guy, said raise taxes, I'm going to do him a solid because I'm an extremely liberal guy. And I'm going to say that, frankly, the unions limit our imagination, and so they're going to come up with all of these new fire stations and where they need to be located. And they're all going to have their own laundry, and they're all going to have their own commercial kitchen, and they're all going to have their own, bedroom quarters, because the unions can't envision a different way to deliver fire service. And so we probably might need to look for a fire delivery service that isn't union, so that we don't have to build these palaces, because quite honestly, fire, we need that service. Obviously, buildings and homes do catch on fire in our cities, but rarely. And we mentioned a couple of times the quarterly report that we get from Gresham. It shows that better than 70% of our calls are medical.
Right.
So we could build smaller stations. We could have the QRVs like we had before and serve our cities quite well for less money if we aren't constrained by that lack of imagination.
I love what you're saying, and it follows on what Glenn was saying in bringing up that idea of an innovative solution. Like, I would 100% support working together in this ad hoc way if innovative solutions were also were absolutely part of the mix, and looking at other places inside and outside of Oregon to see what they're doing with police and fire services, because we're at such a crisis point that we can't, like, what's the definition of insanity, right? We're not insane. Nobody in this room is insane. Like, but we have to do things differently, right? Like we, just continuing to trim and trim and trim and look at the same old systems isn't going to do it. And maybe and let's face it, look around. Everybody has been reimagining fire service and law enforcement service now for a really long time. I mean, those trends in fire have been going on for a couple decades now, that it's gone from firefighting to, really medical service. And look at Portland Street Response and other things. A lot of law enforcement calls are, public safety checks, right? Mental health checks. It's not necessarily somebody holding up a bank. So, we can change our services. So I think like having a SWOT analysis as part of this, innovative solutions, some guiding principles to Sandy's point, like what's like framing this around, like what are our principles here? Is that the best service? Is it the lowest price? Like what's the North Star that we're kind of looking at? And also looking at not just options, but I would like to see impacts on other services, impacts on taxes, impacts on safety, so that we're really looking at a pretty comprehensive picture.
And while the time frame says that we have to come to decisions quickly, I think we really need to get down into the weeds, because if you look at a lot of those medical calls, they are to care centers in our cities that aren't equipped to lift a patient when they fall. So they got to call the fire department. So maybe we have code that says you don't get to have a center in our cities if you can't lift the patient. And then we knock off hundreds of fire medical calls.
And what some of this conversation has been going on, I believe, on the quick response and limiting having to roll an engine or a truck on aid calls.
There's, it's been a while since we've had our regular Four Cities fire meeting, so I can't attest to where exactly the QRVs are roaming and how they're roaming, but I also know they says be calls to the same caller, calling over and over again for some medical. They're basically calling in lieu of going to the doctor and triaging it through a non-fire or physical medical response. That was a pilot project in partnership with OHSU in Portland State, I believe. But again, I'm not sure the status of it. So, I mean, to Gresham's, point and credit, they're trying to work some innovative things. Yeah. And also to the other points mentioned, fire service is built on a lot of history. And it's also, we have NFPA standards that seem to come from, how do I put this delicately? Fire unions and protecting some of those, this many people per rig. And there's a lot of reasons for that, especially in critical calls and fire calls. Not going to argue that. There also seems to be some room for growth around medical response and where the call demand is today.
And it's that lack of imagination again from the union showed there, because it was only run during daytime hours. It was run by the people that would volunteer or be easier to be voluntold that they weren't going to work, 3 on 2 off anymore. They were going to work, 5 days a week, 10-hour shift, in order to run the QRV vehicle. So QRV didn't have union support. And then, they also found in the first year that you really have to be careful about, what sort of infrastructure you build around the trucks, because they parked them outside and all the liquids on board froze. So no IV bags, nothing like that. And so, the QRV has costs that you got to consider, like a warm space to park the truck. So,
Well, I would sure support what the conversation is here tonight, and certainly add to the ad hoc that it's not just the same old, that we do look at what are some potential, if we have to look at this report again, maybe, maybe that report will deliver some ideas outside the box. Maybe they were there last time and just didn't get done. But anyway, that's I think we need to I'm supportive of an ad hoc committee that's going to begin looking at this. And I don't know whether getting back to Wendy's point of, what's the North Star? That's an important piece. But we want to get it started on getting in the weeds too. So
I'd support the ad hoc committee as well. I would want to push them in the direction of considering another fire study. But of course, it'd only be potentially one member, because Greg was right. When we negotiated the last 10-year contract, we were a resource, not a burden. And in fact, there was nothing about their current system, location wise or anything, that they wouldn't have to do. They didn't serve us. And so, but where that will change is if they decide that they want new fire stations. Right now, they all have to be relocated by, about a block or across the street in order to become more efficient. And they really haven't explained to us why they would be. But when they start building that stuff, then, our income that we give them is not a resource anymore. And it feels as though they're on a path to build it with or without us. So with us, it's just going to cost us a lot more money.
And we do have some hands raised from our online folks. I believe Councilor Glantz was first.
Thanks. I'm just wondering, the ad hoc committee is great, but can it have, I don't know if you would call it a charter? Basically a to-do list or decision tree, something that says, here's, the 3 things we need to know, and then shoot it back to the city councils so they can come back and say, yes, no, maybe. I worry a lot on this, that there are so many weeds that we can get lost in the weeds and not get some of the big picture stuff handled first.
Can you roll up to the vote too?
Do
the other way. So there were
Wondering about that too.
3 nays on the ad hoc committee. So I'd be interested in learning a little bit why.
That was because we were discussing how that committee should be formed and from where. It wasn't that it shouldn't be formed.
Basically, the makeup of the committee, if we should be a budget heavy ad hoc group or a PSAC heavy ad hoc group or council heavy ad hoc group. So there was just a differing opinion on that. But like Councilor Glantz said, the idea of the ad hoc committee was agreed on by everybody.
Yeah, as you see from the resolution, this committee was not designed to make decisions, make recommendations. It was simply to begin the process. What don't we know? What do we need to learn? What should we start in terms of gathering that information, and what are all the factors that have to be considered so that we can begin this process trying to learn those things? And so once that gets completed, then we'll have a better idea of the things we need to be doing to explore.
Can I read into that vote and looking at the composition of the working group is that it looks like the public safety and equity heavy group 1? Does that also infer that the North Star is safety and not budget?
No, Mayor Lauer, if I could just answer that, the task of the Public Safety and Equity Committee in our ordinance is that they're the primary citizen committee that oversees how our public safety, fire, police, 911 are provided to the citizens. And since that was one of their primary missions, that I think the council and Mayor Lauer and Councilor White can speak to this, is that since that is their primary calling to do that, they should have an extra person on the committee and not make the committee too big. So there was a lot of horse trading in that meeting, Mayor.
There was, and my reasoning for agreeing with the numbers that we had was that, in essence, our budget committee is made up of equal parts council and equal parts citizens. So having 2 budget and 2 council, I felt was almost the same. And so having 3 PSAC and 2 budget and 2 council, I felt was a good route that we ended up going with. But I just wanted to state really quick, my comments, even though Councilor Glantz kind of stole my thunder, but I appreciate her words. I am in absolute agreement with some sort of Three Cities ad hoc group. I'm just wondering if this Three Cities council meeting could make up that ad hoc group, and if this could in effect be one of our first meetings as an ad hoc group. The only reason why is to echo what Councilor Glantz stated is not necessarily to get lost in the minutia of creating solutions for all the world's problems all at the get-go when our real problem is just finding more financially better ways to serve our communities. And it kind of seems like we're landing on the fire side of this discussion. So if not, I'm still very much in favor of an ad hoc group. I think now's the time to get this going. And to echo what Councilor White stated, if the people in charge years ago were to take this step, we'd be miles ahead. Let's not make this mistake now and end up being that topic of discussion 10 years from now that we had the chance to be miles ahead then. So thank you.
I think fire is the right place to land. I mean, we've identified about 3 elephants to eat.
Yeah.
We're probably only going to be able to do them one at a time. So.
Well, perhaps the managers can gather and talk maybe what some options could be for ad hoc groups, take it back to, again, our respective councils, get their views and kind of cycle back. So you're not all in the weeds on that particular part. You want to be in the weeds of, the service part of it, the policy part of it. So if that's acceptable, we can put something together.
And what I heard was that you're asking staff to kind of do a Three Cities version of what Troutdale was started on their own, in the sense of begin the process of gathering information, finding out what do we need to know to make an intelligent decision. That's what I think I'm hearing.
On the broader proposal, but I don't want to get pigeonholed into any one. We do know that there are certain priorities. I think that's a given. But I do think that our strength will be a holistic view of what our city services are. Or we'll ultimately find our savings and possibly, I love the idea and the commitment of everybody has that negotiating from a position of strength is in all our best interests. And I think that, being prepared for that is, again, all in our best interest.
Yeah, and I would just like to also back Sandy's idea of some kind of charter and guiding principles. Like, I support this broadly, but I would like to support it more specifically and understanding, will we have guiding principles or a decision tree or a SWOT analysis, innovative solutions? What would this actually, what will they do other than very broadly look at options? You could drive a truck through that. So what options are we talking about? And
Go ahead, Mike.
and how will this get done?
Again, and I'm echoing the same thing, and I hope that the 3 city managers maybe can come back with at least a draft of what the goal is of this ad hoc committee, with probably some bullets under it. But I would continue to stress that it's fire that's looking us in the face here, and then I think the conversation with the ad hoc committee will invariably come up with some other places that we could possibly begin to expand our sharing of services. That's my idea. If you have enough,
I think there's enough to craft, something broad enough that, again, there's that shared service mindset, efficiency mindset, while then crafting some priorities, maybe kind of immediate priorities, longer term priorities. And who's to say this couldn't be a standing group that, even as counselors change, staff members change, it's not just an ongoing group, much like Main Street Sun Halsey or some of our other multi-city groups, that over time, we're hitting some of these initiatives and getting synergies around, legislative matters and other larger, bigger issues. Nothing to say that couldn't be it, but certainly I think there's some immediate priorities, and not limiting it to as other things come up or there are opportunities to take advantage of.
Yeah, I think.
Is there anybody who thinks this is a dumb idea? I think we all agree that this seems to be where we want to go. So
agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Mayor Harden stated it correctly. We found a lot of elephants to start trying to devour. And I think if we start taking bites out of this fire one, we might make some good headway. And then what we're going to do in the process is set up a way that we can, like Greg just stated, set up a way where we can start tackling other priorities, maybe equally as important, maybe, lower down on the list. But I think what we're doing is creating framework to continue this conversation, because let's be honest, we're not big cities. There's no reason why we can't work together. So I think this is a great day and a great meeting and a great discussion. And I look forward to finding out what good work we can do coming out of meetings like this.
Speaking of eating, there's a meat tray, cookies, water, and soda on the table over here. So,
Listen, I'm sitting in my hotel room and I had Jersey Mike's for dinner about 10 minutes prior to the meeting. So I don't want to hear about your spread that you have in there.
well, I'm
Mayor, I don't know if
I'm
you,
glad, yeah, I'm glad to hear that you're in a hotel room, because I shudder to think that you'd pick out those curtains for your own home.
Motel 6, but. Counselors, this has been an excellent discussion. I think we've come to a point where we have a sense of the will of the counselors that are participating in this meeting in giving the three managers some direction to put together a draft of a potential 3-city ad hoc group. And as Greg well said, we'll talk both on what its immediate priorities are, but also set the stage for a broader agenda, similar to what Mayor Cooper discussed. And when it comes back to you, you can consider whether it's a limited term thing or if it is a longer term thing. And we'll give that some thought in terms of what we bring to you as a recommendation. But with that, gentlemen, what do you think in terms of time frame that we might be able to come up with a draft to circulate?
For the, I think we can have something.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Next week.
And so I think what we would do is probably work a preliminary draft between the three of us and in consultation with our respective legislative bodies, and then ultimately probably bring the group together again to look at a final draft. Does that sound like?
Thank you.
thank you. Yeah, and thanks for the,
So the meetings.
Yes.
yeah, and thanks for the work on this in preparation to this meeting.
Yes. A lot of really good, very enlightening info.
How often do you guys meet right now?
Well, once a month, we have a 4-city managers meeting first Thursday of the month. And then we gather sometimes with the joint office when they want to attend. That's on the second month. And then we exchange emails pretty regularly, especially as things
You guys
pop
are
up.
probably pretty regularly discussing when you guys meet, what's happening between the 3 cities. That's happening regularly all the time now. And so I would just emphasize that this piece that's happening right now needs to be continued in perpetuity forever, because I don't see a way that financially we're going to be able to sustain what we're doing now without doing this. And I agree with everybody that the fire probably is the biggest chunk of tackle right now, but I think that there's plenty of look at down the road, and building this synergy and working together. I can tell you just from the stuff we've done with recreation is imperative. And if we can do this with fire, it will definitely be a big thing that we've done all together to build synergy for moving forward. And then this comes to negotiating from a place altogether for this, but it also comes to things like grants and our future region holistically in being able to be 1 unit and not 3 unit. Are not going to be productive long-term, especially with the state.
Thank you.
Mayor Harden?
Final word is yours.
Eat cookies.
Thank you all for.
How you roll.
listening.
It's nice